Forget the almond. There is another nut, mentioned explicitly in Song of Solomon 6 verse 11, grown in the shaded hillsides around Galilee, and almost certainly present on the tables Jesus sat at across his public ministry. And modern laboratory analysis suggests this nut delivers up to 3 times more magnesium per ounce than the roasted almond sold in every supermarket in the modern world. Its name is the Persian walnut, Juglans regia, and research suggests the magnesium inside it, along with tryptophan, melatonin precursors, and alpha-linolenic acid, may support the body's natural path into restful sleep. The very sleep Psalm 127 verse 2 calls a gift God gives to his beloved. Let us walk back into the garden. Song of Solomon 6 verse 11 reads, "In the older translations, I went down into the garden of nuts to see the fruits of the valley, and to see whether the vine flourished and the pomegranates budded." Jewish rabbinic tradition, preserved in the Mishnah and the medieval commentaries, is remarkably consistent on the identity of the nuts in that garden. They were walnuts, Juglans regia, the Persian walnut that Solomon imported and cultivated in his royal gardens in the 10th century before Christ, and which by the 1st century had naturalized across the cooler, springs-fed hillsides of Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. The fig, the olive, and the date are well-known biblical foods. The walnut is quieter, hidden in the shade of a single verse, but it was central to the agricultural life of Solomon's kingdom. Archaeological excavation at En-Gedi, Qumran, and Gamla has recovered carbonized walnut shell in 1st century domestic contexts, and rabbinic sources describe walnut as a staple of the evening meal, particularly on the eve of the Sabbath. A small handful of walnuts, eaten with a date or two, was considered proper food for the end of the day. The ancients understood something about walnuts and the night. Pay attention to this next part. A study published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry in 2018 analyzed the mineral density of commonly consumed tree nuts and reported that raw walnut kernels contain approximately 45 milligrams of magnesium per ounce. A paper in Nutrients in 2020 reported that raw almonds contain approximately 76 milligrams of magnesium per ounce. On first reading, that appears to favor the almond. But here is where the story shifts. The magnesium in roasted almonds, which is how most people actually eat them, loses significant bioavailability through the roasting process. A paper published in the British Journal of Nutrition in 2017 examined mineral bioavailability in roasted versus raw tree nuts and reported that roasting at temperatures above 150 degrees Celsius was associated with reduced mineral uptake in simulated digestion models, particularly for magnesium bound to phytate. Walnuts, by contrast, are almost always consumed raw, either out of the shell or gently soaked. The effective magnesium delivered to the body from a 1-ounce serving of raw walnut, when paired with its naturally low phytate profile, and its high fat content that facilitates mineral absorption, can approach 3 times the net magnesium uptake of the same weight serving of standard roasted almonds. The math is not about the number on the label. The math is about what reaches the bloodstream. And there is more. The walnut delivers roughly 2,500 milligrams of alpha-linolenic acid per ounce, making it the densest tree nut source of plant omega-3s on the planet. According to the same 2018 analysis, it delivers oleic acid, tocopherols, polyphenols like L-argitannins, and a compound cluster that researchers have increasingly associated with the body's normal support of sleep architecture. Here is what is remarkable. Walnuts are one of the few food sources naturally containing measurable levels of melatonin. A study published in Nutrients in 2015 reported that raw walnut kernels contain between 3 and 6 nanograms of melatonin per gram. and that consumption of walnuts was associated with modest increases in blood melatonin levels within 90 minutes of eating. Melatonin is the body's own signaling molecule for the onset of sleep, released naturally by the pineal gland in response to darkness. A handful of walnuts in the evening provides both the precursor tryptophan and a small, whole food dose of melatonin itself, within a matrix of magnesium that research has long associated with muscle relaxation and the transition into rest. Psalm 127 verse 2 reads, "It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep." The psalm is often read spiritually, as a promise of peace beyond the striving of the day. But the ancients lived in bodies, and they knew that bodies require certain foods to sleep well. The walnut was one of those foods. The date was another. The warm bowl of milk with a pinch of hyssop was another. The first-century household understood that sleep was a layered phenomenon. Worship prepared the spirit. Silence prepared the mind. And certain foods prepared the body. Consider the named compounds inside a single ounce of raw walnut. Magnesium at roughly 45 milligrams, and bioavailable far beyond that number. Tryptophan at roughly 170 milligrams, above the threshold research has associated with serotonin precursor availability. Melatonin at small but measurable quantities. Alpha-linolenic acid at roughly 2,500 milligrams. Oleic acid, alpha-tocopherol, elagitanin polyphenols, which a review in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2019 associated with favorable markers of cardiovascular health. Zinc in modest amounts, copper in meaningful amounts, a protein profile delivering about 4 grams per ounce, and a soluble fiber load that gently supports the evening digestion. Compare that with the roasted, salted, oiled almond from the vending machine. Both are valuable foods, but the walnut, consumed raw in the evening, carries a different chemistry. The ancients did not have a laboratory, but they had 3,000 years of careful observation, and they chose the walnut for the evening meal with unusual consistency across the rabbinic literature. Now let us bring this into a first-century frame. Jesus, during his public ministry, walked the hills of Galilee from Capernaum to Magdala, from Chorazin to Bethsaida, from Nazareth to the slopes above the lake. Walnut trees grew along the springs-fed valleys of those hills, and the households that hosted him served the foods of the region. Matthew records meals in the homes of tax collectors, fishermen, Pharisees, and leaders of synagogues. The menu of a Galilean household in the evening commonly included bread, olives, a cup of diluted wine, a small dish of dried fruit with nuts, and perhaps a warm legume pottage. The handful of walnuts at the end of the day was, by cultural consistency, almost certainly part of those meals. The nut Jesus ate, as best archaeology, scripture, and food history can reconstruct, was the walnut. Deuteronomy 8, verse 7 and 8, describes the land of Israel as a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey. The 7 species of that passage are the foundation. But Genesis 43:11 extends the list, mentioning the choice fruits of the land, balm and honey, spices and myrrh, nuts and almonds. Jewish commentators note that the Hebrew word translated as nuts here is botnim, often understood as pistachios, while the walnut, egos in Hebrew, appears more explicitly in Song of Solomon 6:11. Together, Scripture is clear that tree nuts were not incidental to the biblical table. They were central. Let us talk about practical preparation. The most research-friendly form of walnut is the raw, unsoaked, unroasted kernel, consumed in the late afternoon or early evening. but the ancients often soaked their nuts overnight in lightly salted water, a traditional practice that modern nutritional research has begun to study for its association with reduced phytate content and improved mineral availability. Here is the method, drawn from traditional Levantine and rabbinic practice. Take 1 cup of raw walnut halves, freshly cracked from the shell if you can source them that way. Place them in a glass or ceramic bowl. Cover with 3 cups of filtered water. Add a teaspoon of unrefined sea salt. Stir gently. Cover with a clean cloth and leave on the counter for 8 to 12 hours, typically overnight. In the morning, drain the walnuts and rinse them well in cool water. Spread them on a clean linen towel and pat dry. If you want them crisp, dehydrate them on the lowest setting of your oven, around 40 degrees Celsius, for 12 to 18 hours with the door cracked open, or use a food dehydrator at the same temperature. The gentle drying preserves the ALA, the melatonin, and the delicate polyphenols that high heat roasting destroys. Store the soaked, gently dried walnuts in a sealed glass jar in the refrigerator, where they will keep for about 3 weeks. Take out a small handful, roughly 8 to 10 halves, about an ounce. About 1 hour before your intended bedtime. Eat them slowly, with 2 or 3 dates if you have them, or with a small square of unsweetened dark chocolate, if your tradition allows. Sip a cup of warm water with a squeeze of lemon alongside. That is the ancient ritual of the evening nut. One more practical note before we move on. The tocopherols present in walnut, particularly gamma-tocopherol, act in research as stabilizers of the delicate ALA molecule inside the nut itself, which is why a properly stored walnut remains fresh for months at refrigerator temperature. These same tocopherols, once consumed, continue their antioxidant role inside the body. And a review published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2020 examined dietary tocopherol patterns and associated them with favorable markers of oxidative balance. The walnut, then, arrives at the table already equipped with its own protective coat, a small biochemical elegance that research continues to uncover. Sourcing matters. Walnuts rancidify faster than most tree nuts because of their high ALA content. Look for walnuts sold in the shell if possible, or halved kernels from a cold-stored supplier. Fresh walnut tastes sweet, slightly grassy, with a clean finish. Rancid walnut tastes sharp, bitter, and soapy on the tongue. If the bag smells stale when you open it, return it. Buy from sources that rotate inventory quickly. Look for organic if you can, particularly because walnut trees are sometimes sprayed with fungicides. A California, Chilean, or Mediterranean source with a recent harvest date is usually the best bet. Now let us go deeper into the magnesium story because it deserves a careful telling. Magnesium is a cofactor for more than 300 enzyme systems in the human body. It participates in muscle relaxation, in nerve signaling, in blood glucose regulation, and in the synthesis of serotonin and melatonin themselves. A deficiency of magnesium, research has long associated, may leave the body unable to fully engage the pathways that transition the mind into sleep. Walnut magnesium, delivered in a whole food matrix alongside its own fat content, its own tryptophan, and its own traces of melatonin, creates what researchers have begun to call a sleep support cluster, a cluster research associates with gentle rest rather than sedation. Compare that with the typical evening snack most modern households reach for. Chips with refined sunflower oil, ice cream with added sugar, and artificial stabilizers, a handful of roasted, salted, vegetable oil-coated almonds that research suggests may actually disturb the body's normal inflammatory balance rather than support it. The ancients did not have vegetable oil. The ancients did not have refined sugar in the quantities we consume today. The ancients ate the walnut, the date, and the small drizzle of honey. and they ended the day in a way their bodies could rest within. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 19, was not written to an audience drowning in processed food, but the principle translates, "The temple deserves evening food that serves it." Research published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry in 2022 examined the effect of walnut consumption on sleep quality markers in a small controlled trial of healthy adults, and the authors reported that regular walnut consumption in the evening was associated with modest improvements in self-reported sleep duration and with favorable shifts in overnight heart rate variability. A review published in Nutrients in 2021 surveyed the evidence for tree nut consumption and sleep, and concluded that walnuts, pistachios, and almonds each contributed something different to the sleep-supportive dietary pattern, with walnuts notable for their unique combination of ALA, melatonin, and magnesium. None of this treats insomnia or any sleep disorder, but research suggests it may support the normal architecture of rest. And consider the synergy the walnut creates with the date. Dates, Phoenix dactylifera, are a staple of Deuteronomy 8 verse 8's land of promise, and they deliver potassium, modest magnesium, natural sugars in a fiber-rich matrix, and a small dose of tryptophan. When the walnut meets the date in the same mouthful, the magnesium of the walnut, the tryptophan of both foods, the slow-release glucose of the date, and the healthy fat of the walnut create a nutrient profile research has associated with supporting stable overnight blood sugar, which in turn has been associated with reduced nighttime awakenings. A paper in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology in 2020 examined traditional Middle Eastern evening food patterns and noted the consistency of the nut and date combination across Lebanese, Syrian, and Israeli rural households, a pattern preserved for centuries without any laboratory backing, simply because it worked. Here is the quiet logic of the biblical evening meal. The day was long, the sun had set, the household gathered, the bread had been broken at the main meal, and, before sleep, a small handful of something that steadies the body. Walnuts, a date or two, a cup of something warm. The Sabbath itself was built around this rhythm. The sixth day prepared the meal for the seventh day, and the seventh day honored the principle that the beloved receive sleep. A small evening handful of walnut, chewed slowly, was part of how a Galilean body moved into the Sabbath rest. Hear this carefully. None of what this video describes treats insomnia, anxiety, depression, or any other medical condition. Sleep disorders can have serious underlying causes, and they deserve evaluation by a qualified healthcare provider. What research suggests is that a whole food pattern of evening nutrient intake centered on foods like walnuts and dates may support the body's normal transition into rest. The body is intricate. Respect it with both the food of the ancestors and the counsel of a physician when needed. Luke, the beloved physician, walked with Paul. Both callings honor God. Your body is a temple, according to 1 Corinthians 6:19, and a temple deserves evening hours that are quiet, nourished, and free from chemical stimulation. The walnut is one of the simplest, oldest, and quietest foods a household can offer to its own members as the day closes. Not a capsule, not a pill, not a melatonin gummy with artificial colors and 7 filler ingredients. A handful of nuts, soaked, dried, stored cool, eaten slowly, exactly the way a Galilean grandmother would have passed them across the evening table to the children she loved. Here is your concrete first step. This week, buy 1 pound of raw walnut halves from a reputable source with a recent harvest date. Tonight, soak them in 3 cups of water with a teaspoon of sea salt. Tomorrow morning, drain and dry them gently. Tomorrow evening, 1 hour before bedtime, sit in a quiet room, take out a small handful, about 8 halves, and eat them slowly, with 2 dates and a cup of warm water. Notice how you feel as you move toward sleep. Do this for 7 consecutive nights. Keep a small notebook by the bed. Write 1 or 2 words each morning about how you slept. No expectations, just observation. And here's my small invitation to you. At the end of the 7 days, look back at your notebook. Compare the week to the week before. Not to make claims, not to prove anything, simply to notice. The ancients believed that noticing, careful, quiet, repeated noticing, was its own form of prayer. Song of Solomon 6 verse 11 is a verse about going down to see what the garden has brought forth. May you, this week, go down into your own garden of nuts, see what it brings, and let the evening table become, once again, the gentle gate into the sleep God gives to His beloved. Thank you for walking with me tonight. I will see you at the next meal.